With each episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what it really means to build a media career, break barriers, and stay true to your voice. So, welcome to Her Media Diary, the podcast where African women share the real stories, bold moves, and behind the scenes moments that shaped their journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Yemisi Akimobola. Today's episode is on AI and African newsrooms. Now, there's a version of the conversation about AI that stays entirely in the technological lane, but there's another conversation that stays in the legal lane. What frameworks govern how artificial intelligence handles the data journalists collect? Who owns the content that AI system produces? And what rights does a source have when their information is fed into a machine? These are the kind of questions that my guest today will help us to unpack and find answers to. Mbanangwa Kwilasya is a compliance expert and the founder of MK Legal Consultancy. She was part of the process that led to Malawi's Data Protection Act, which came in force in 2024. She works in the African Union Development Agency on AI development, intellectual property law, and ethical AI governance. Mbanangwa, welcome to Her Media Diary. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that good introduction.
So little secret, we practice Mbanangwa's name at the beginning. How did I do?
You did really well. You did really
Thank
well. I'm proud of
you very
you.
much. It's a lovely name. What does it mean?
It means they're free.
Oh, they're free. Nice. That's nice. That's really, really.
Yes.
And culturally, does it have like a cultural context that helps us to understand that?
So I was given the name by my grandmother, and it was her mother's name. And I'm sure that there must be some history there, but I've never really dug deep into that one. But yeah, so it is my great grandmother's name.
Okay, so I love that idea of a maternal heritage of names. So that's
Yes,
fantastic.
definitely.
Yeah, and I like to start this podcast not by kind of starting with the career journey, but really going back to the early years and understanding your journey. Growing up in Malawi. Did you grow up in Malawi? And did you know your grandmother?
Yes, actually, I grew up in Malawi and I did grow up with my grandmother actually for the most part of my childhood. It was such an amazing experience. And I think that part of my drive to feminism has been shaped by the amount of women that are in my life. They're just such go-getters. And I think for every single day and every single path that has led me to who I am today, I really can attribute most of it to the women that have built me from the ground up. So it was a great experience. Malawi is a small little country out in the southern part of Africa. There's a population of about 22 million people right now. But back then, I think it was around 10 to 14 million people. And yeah, so it has been an experience living in a poor country, so one of the poorest countries in the world, but also just having the opportunities that, my parents have been able to afford me to get to a position where I can, get through an education and go to university and then, eventually do exactly what it is that I am doing right now. Yeah.
So, but what would you say was your earliest memory? What was your world like back in those days?
So, let me see. My earliest memory, I think I must have been 3 years old. It was my third birthday. My mother got me a bike, a tricycle, and I had a little birthday party. And then my mom presented me the little tricycle, and I was just over the moon, just riding around that little thing. I have so many pictures of that, and I actually distinctively remember that particular moment very well. And my mom is very shocked about that. She's like, "What kind of child are you?"
Yeah, it's interesting the things that we that sticks in our minds, and it must have been a very
Yes,
special.
it was definitely very special. But I also have random memories of her listening to, on Sundays, there used to be a radio program called Heartbreak Zone. And I distinctly remember my mom listening to that Heartbreak Zone so much. And there was a day I sang a song and I was like, "Oh, I remember listening to this." She's like, "You were 3."
Wow,
Yes.
amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make the connection between, how did we end up in this area of data protection, privacy law, and especially it's still, I mean, data protection and privacy law is not necessarily a new field, but obviously new in the context of AI, etc. So take us back to your initial entry point into this career field.
Okay, so like you already mentioned, I'm a compliance specialist. So a lot of my work has been within the payments sector, the financial services sector, but then we also deal with a lot of like AML regulation, so that is anti-money laundering, anti-financial crimes, and a lot of investigations that go along with that. So when I first attended what we call the African Law Tech Fest, I was working for a company where I was actually a risk and compliance manager. At that point, I attended that conference, and there was a lot of discussion around data protection. And I said, hey, wait a minute, this looks like such an interesting area and the field. And I was like, you know what, let me look more into this. And once I dove in, I was completely in it, and I was very intrigued by it. And obviously, naturally, because of the data protection aspect, the AI just kind of like sips right into it, because AI deals with a lot of data. It literally functions on the amount of data that it is trained on, the amount of data that we input into it. And that is why the data protection aspect and the AI angle just kind of seemed like a very natural fit. So when we started MK Legal Consultancy, I thought that there's absolutely no way we can talk about AI or data protection without actually including this new mysterious thing called AI. And we need to make sure how we govern it is especially more connected and linked to the data protection aspect.
Well, first of all, before we go into the detail, I'm actually curious. I was just wondering, well, how did you even get down to this point? Like in your career, was this, did you, as a 3 year old, listen to your mom, think, yeah, this is what I want to do with my life? Like, how did you get into this field?
Do you know, my whole life, I only know that I've always wanted to be a lawyer. You know, when there's people who changed careers, when it's popular to be an accountant, I never ever wavered. So right from when I was 5 years old, I was like, I know I'm going to be a lawyer. I didn't know what lawyers did at the time even. I thought that lawyers just put bad people in prison, and that's what I thought I was going to be doing. And then when I started to learn even more about the law and the defense about it, I was like, hey, actually, I really definitely want to be a lawyer. So I've never ever wavered, and there was no lawyer in my family. So I have absolutely no idea where I got it from, but it has it has been what I wanted to be for the longest time, and for as long as I can remember. So I did start my school, my university at Chancellor College, which is in Malawi. Unfortunately, I didn't get into the law school there, but I had gotten into another program. Then my mother said, "Oh well, maybe just finish this program, then you can apply for law later." I said, "No, we are doing this now. I want to be a lawyer, and if I have to go somewhere else and do this, I want to go somewhere else." And luckily for me, my mom is very very supportive, and I ended up studying law at Rhodes University in South Africa, and that is how I also actually ended up here. Yeah, so it just I've always just wanted to be a lawyer. However, the pivot to compliance is what has what started from varsity. Now you're learning law, you're learning criminal law, and I'm like, I don't think that I can, I can actually go into court and argue. But then there was another aspect of law, which is the compliance aspect, where you actually do engage with the law, but you also do not end up going into court. You're not defending criminals, so to speak, and so it gave me the same what was I looking for? Satisfaction, I suppose. That say, okay, I'm still handling the law, I'm still dealing with the law, and I'm still playing around with it, but also in a very different context in terms of like the protection aspect of it.
A little unknown fact about me is I actually did law was one of my A levels, and that was the path I
What?
was like, on, the journey I was on. I mean, to be fair, my parents wanted
Really?
me to be a doctor, and that kind of thought, okay, what's the best next best thing that I could do without being a doctor? And Yeah,
It's usually
that's a
why.
whole different world, a different time. As you can see today, I'm not a lawyer, but I absolutely
No,
adore it. But you're not just a lawyer.
absolutely.
You're not just a
But you
lawyer,
do
though. You
interact with it.
say that again.
I say, but you do interact with the law. I mean, being in your industry as well, there's
Yeah,
definitely a lot
yeah,
of it that you have to adhere to. Yeah.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And I was saying that you didn't just go into law. You founded your own legal consultancy, right? And
Yes.
building something rather than just joining something. So talk us through that journey.
Yeah, so it is definitely an exciting and a very scary journey. I had reached a point where I knew I did not want to practice law, but I also got to a point where I was not satisfied with the gap that I was experiencing, which was the compliance aspect and then the risk management aspect. So I had an interest in, the financial services sector. So I thought, okay, how can I bring these two words together with the fintechs? Because I enjoy the technology that the fintechs build and then how they build their premises, I mean, their businesses around such new technology. But I also still want to engage with the law. And here comes this compliance aspect. Maybe I can consult in this area and, did a couple of research and, I said, I just dive in and you figure it out as you go. So I did that in 2023. Started it just by myself, firstly, and then I had a friend who was helping me with like getting clients, and would talk about things on LinkedIn, publishing the website. So, fun fact is that I created my website myself. And
Amazing.
yeah, so when I started, because you become everything when you're starting out a little business. You are
Absolutely.
an accountant, you are your marketing manager, you are sales, every
Mm.
single thing. So I had to learn a lot of things, which I also have enjoyed as a process itself. So beyond MK Legal Consultancy, and as we've grown over the years, we have also started, adding some areas of interest like AI research for us was a big addition that we did add in 2024. It has it has taken up a life of its own. We have done a lot of projects in the AI space. We have produced a lot of work. We have published a lot in the same front. So it has been a very, very good aspect, and also a very good learning point for sure. And the learning never stops.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about
Yeah.
that Data Protection Act in a second, but I want to also go back a little bit to talk on this African-centric approach to data protection and privacy. What does that look like in practice? What is different from simply applying a framework that were designed elsewhere?
Yeah, so with Africa, you have to also be able to see that we live in a different context. We have a lot of cultures, tribes, um, traditions within the same African context. So we cannot just rip something off that cannot actually apply in the African context, so to speak. So everything needs to be very contextually based. So you have to know that, okay, if we're applying this data protection law here, if we just extract this GDPR wording, is it really going to apply in, say, Malawi, for example? It's absolutely not. The infrastructure is different. The economy is different. The backgrounds is different. We are not dealing with the same infrastructures that are available as well, even the same educational levels that are available as well. So we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're building is still going to sit culturally well with our traditions, but it's also still going to be legally sound in the sense that it can actually be protected and it can actually be implemented effectively.
Absolutely. So let's talk now about Malawi's Data Protection Act, right? It came into force in 2024, but
Yes.
legislation like that doesn't always, arrive fully formed. So there are years of advocacy, consultation, drafting arguments, revisions, and all of that goes behind it. And you
Ye-
were part of that very intense, what I imagine to be a very intensive process. And I would love
Intense.
to hear about your journey. So can you walk us through it, like where it began? Your hair tearing moments, what you were most proud of in that process.
All right. So the Data Protection Act, the drafting started in 2023. And I think the first draft was presented to Parliament in December 2023. So by 2024, it had been assented, and then it came into force June 2024. The process of drafting and the back and forth and making sure that we are consulting multiple legislation. So we want to also look at the mature data protection laws that have been around, like say South Africa's personal information protection act. You want to make sure that it aligns with South Africa, but also still aligns with countries that are more similar to Malawi. So we did a lot of adoption. We adopted from the Kenya's Data Protection Act. We adopted South Africa's POPIA. We adopted Zambia's Data Protection Act as well. So just looking at the context of, what are the other data protection acts within Africa protecting, how have they worded their context, and also looking at similar economic backgrounds. For example, and Zambia is a neighboring country with Malawi. So we definitely thought, okay, this is how we should structure it. There was definitely a lot of back and forth and removing additions, and also making sure that what we are building is an instrument that is actually going to work in the Malawian context, because Malawi already did have an electronics act, which kind of protects data in a certain space, but it was not actually dealing with data protection in the larger aspect. And there's a lot of incidents in Malawi where there's leaks of personal information. There isn't really protection, and I think a lot of people also still did not know which angles they can take, especially when you're looking at the acts that you can go say, oh no, somebody posted bad pictures of me online, and you go to the Electronics Act and you look at it, and it's just not really protecting you as a person in terms of what kind of personal information it is that you want to protect. So it was lacking in that way, but we also had to make sure that that act, it still works together with the Data Protection Act as well. So it has to be a lot forward thinking, taking into account what is it that we are actually tackling here, and who are we actually protecting, and what kind of information are we protecting in this age. We also don't want laws that are competing against each other, and laws that do not that also hinge upon say they're in the way of other laws, like with freedom of expression. You think of data protection, people think, oh no, that means they don't want us to speak freely, so it means that they're taking away our access to information, because now there's all these laws, but that's not what it's doing. The act itself is making sure that you actually do use this data responsibly. So now, whereas you can just go to a bank and say, hey, I want to see Mbanangwa's salary because she owes me money, the bank cannot give you that information. You know what I mean? But whereas it was quite easy, and it was actually quite a practice where people would just list out names like, oh, this person lives here, lives there, they owe me money, I want to do this. So it's like now it's now you have to deal with personal information very responsibly, and what you actually expose to the world as well. So it was a very good process in itself, and also advocating for it, operationalizing it, making sure that the systems that are in place, the instruments that are going to be enforcing actually work. And at the moment, I think the Data Protection Authority is at work in Malawi, but I haven't seen much enforcement, which is usually the problem also in the African context. As always, we are very policy heavy, but implementation poor. Like, we do not know how to get things done. And I hope that is a conversation that, we're not going to be having in 10 years, and that we're going to be more on the implementation side.
No, absolutely. I've been on various kind of policy environments, and you're absolutely right in terms of the difference between having the policy and implementation. I think it's a global issue, actually, in terms of that gap between actual enforcement, actual implementation, and the will to do it also, right? And I guess whoever's sitting in the moment, in the power in the moment, is often also determine the extent to which there is a will and a commitment to that enactment as well. Right. So now let's focus specifically on newsrooms, right? Journalists across the continent are starting to use AI tools. Newsrooms are some are doing it thoughtfully, others not so much, right? And many are doing it without any kind of policy framework, whether internally, nationally, etc. So, as a data protection and compliance specialist, when you look at that picture, what are the legal questions that newsrooms on the continent should be asking, or that they're not asking, but absolutely should be asking?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest questions that should be asked is how accurate is this information that we are presenting out in the world? Because AI, as much as it's very, very good, it is also a hallucinator. It's known to hallucinate. So if you are, say, using AI very much in the newsroom, you have to make sure you have verified that information. You, as a confident journalist, you're trusted to give correct information, accurate information, and people actually trust the words that are coming from you. Now, if you say it confidently and it's something that AI just hallucinated and you did not verify to check, that is a very, very dangerous aspect. And I have actually seen this happen before in the Malawian aspect, where I've seen a journalist that presented something that was completely untrue, and that has never led to a good thing. It makes you it discredits you as a journalist, and your credibility is all you have actually to sustain the job. You want to make sure that you are credible. So I would definitely say that there's a lot more in terms of verification and ensuring that you are giving out accurate information. So where you have put in information, you have used AI to help you disseminate some kind of information, make sure that all of that information has been verified. Another aspect I would also say to ask and also look at and protect is the kind of input and confidentiality aspect. So, data exposure. What it is, AI is trained on data, like we have already spoken about. So, what you do not want is to put in your confidential source into that AI data because you want it to summarize an aspect, but you have now exposed this your witness, for example, your source, whoever the information has come from, which is another thing that we value in media. We value the protection of the source itself, the people that have trusted us to tell their stories. So if you put that information into that AI tool, you risk having that source exposed to the world. So I would also be asking that information. Another information is also the reliance on AI in terms of how AI has a lot of bias. Most of these AI tools are Western. So they're trained on a lot of Western data. So if we are not careful, we might be presenting a specific bias to the world. So our reporting can be very concentrated, maybe even negatively, on a specific demographic, just because that is how it has been trained on, without you actually understanding and engaging with that bias to actually challenge that bias. You're not going to be able to know that I'm putting out information that is completely biased and that might come across as completely wrong, and it might not be received well. Yeah.
Today's conversation reminds us that the future of African media is not only about technology, it is about law, policy, power, and accountability. And that is why I'm excited to share Regulating New Media in Africa, an edited collection by myself, Dr. Vincent Obia, Dr. Suleiman Barr, and Professor Oliver Carter. The book examines digital media regulation, social media, online harms, internet shutdowns, and data infrastructure and digital policymaking across Africa. So, if you care about AI, journalism, digital rights, and African media futures, this book is a must read. Order Regulating New Media in Africa now from Intellect Books and major academic booksellers. Yeah, and like you say, your credibility as a journalist is the most fundamental thing that you need to retain, right? I find it very, very interesting that there's still quite a few newsrooms. I mean, still a lot of newsrooms are yet to get to that point of having some kind of internal AI policy
Policy,
process.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
So here's a question I do not think the African journalists are asking loud enough. When a journalist produces a piece of work and an AI system is trained on that content without permission or compensation, what is the legal position? Does African IP law have anything to say about it right now? And should it?
African IP law does not really have much to say. I think what we have seen engaged right now is actually just on accountability, like who owns the content that is produced by AI. That is the most question that we have seen being engaged with in the IP angle. But we haven't really quite dealt with context of what are the repercussions, if and there's a use of AI or a misuse of AI in a certain aspect. But maybe let me just put in that context. And for example, we are also saying right now, advocating for intellectual property laws to be updated so that they actually also take into consideration the impact of AI. Because right now we are only talking about accountability and ownership, but it does go beyond that. It goes beyond the who owns the content. It also goes beyond, what if it gets it wrong? Who is going to be held responsible? You can say that, oh no, I did not do it. It was my AI that did it, and you can't really go and arrest
The
an algorithm. You can't go. But then again, at the same time, we're saying what AI is produced is not owned by me, it is owned by the AI. So there has to be a good point where we can marry the two to say, okay, these two can exist together, but we also have to make sure that there has to be repercussions that also protect you know the credibility as well as the sanctity of our professions, whether it is your legal profession, whether you're a doctor, because there are doctors that are also searching for medical solutions on AI, and then they misdiagnose someone. What happens then? Is it really the AI that got it wrong, or is it you as a doctor who did not engage those things? So there has to be very deep aspects, and we really have to engage and update our laws. And these are conversations that are not happening, and I wish they could happen a little bit more, because these are very real issues.
I have a follow-up question because I use the term African IP, right? Law. Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing? Like, if is there a whole continental IP structure, intellectual property law structure framework?
No, we do not have that, unfortunately. And that's another thing about Africa that I also do not like. We have very fragmented laws, and every single country looks at a very different way of doing things. Whereas, by the big part of it, we should be able to have governing laws that govern the continent as a whole, like very important issues like intellectual property, data protection, and privacy. This could be continental legislations, like the GDPR is a EU act, that is applicable, that you can actually just amend contextually to that particular country. We can also do that, but we are still very fragmented, and we do not have that unity that I wish that we could have, because a lot of the issues could actually be solved better if we actually had like one view, where we have this is an umbrella and everything kind of falls from there. We are trying to get into this global aspect, say, okay, we are one world now, the world has become smaller, there's a lot of data that is passing between countries, and yet South Africa has a different data protection act. Malawi has a different one. Kenya has a different one. Nigeria has a different one. Ghana has a different one, So it's like, and all of those guys are dealing with different cross-border data laws. So it's like, okay, whose am I actually using? And therefore, we're also slowing ourselves down. Even information sharing is not as good as it should be. If a journalist is in Kenya, wants to verify what's happening in South Africa right now in terms of the xenophobic attacks, there's a data information sharing that is going to have to happen there. But now they have to first navigate, what does the Protection of Personal Information Act in South Africa say in this? Okay, but I'm in Kenya, so what is this say? How do I handle this data when it comes here under Kenyan laws? It's very, very, very difficult to navigate and also move forward in this very global citizen world that we're trying to build.
Absolutely. I just think, I mean, I'm sure there are some conversations already been happening around it, but I just feel some like a very obvious gap, as we're thinking about continental AI governance and all of those things. Now, there's also a pattern that people who work in AI development in Africa talk about regularly, and that's the fact that most of the large language models and content moderation systems that exist were trained predominantly in the Western and English language data context, right? So what that means in practice is that African languages, contexts, and ways of framing stories, right, are either underrepresented or misrepresented in the system. So, from a governance perspective, what would you say is a likely remedy, right? And whose responsibility, which keeps on this track of, whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, so whose responsibility is it? I
Is
mean,
that the big
I
multi-dollar question?
it is a really million multi-dollar question. Like I like to think that we are all responsible for it. However, there's context to it. We need to have a government that actually supports innovation. We need to have support. We need to have finances, which is a big issue in Africa. We want to develop a lot of innovation and development in AI is stopped in Africa because of the financial lack of financial resources to actually build such a system, for example. So what is happening is that a lot of these big AI companies actually come, they look at this idea, and then they offer government money and say, hey, we will take you through our AI. It does this, 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 this. And in return, you guys use this AI, you guys get this amount of money, and then you guys implement this, that, and they keep stealing our information in that way. So we still do not have ownership. We still do not have a lot of regulation around this information that these big AI companies are actually training their data on. I do want to say, though, that I have seen that a lot of enforcement in Nigeria, I think that is my favorite enforcement country, because they have definitely held Gemini responsible for training data that is actually protected, like using copyrighted news articles to train their AI, to train Gemini in Nigeria, and without the consent of those people that wrote those news articles, or whatever it is, information that was obtained, there was no consent with it. I have seen at least that enforcement. I've seen them also hold Meta to the exact same standard, the accountability. But we're not seeing that level of enforcement across the continent, and it's because of that same fragmentation that I was talking about. That if we actually had one umbrella, it would be easy to cut these people off across from one angle, to say you cannot do this in Africa because our laws actually say this. But now it's like country by country has to actually take these big organizations to task. So it isn't a responsibility of, say, just the government, but unfortunately the way that we are set up as a continent, and the corruption, the breeding, it is very difficult to say we are going to take a front foot, because we do not have the economic backing, and we also do not have the political backing. And unfortunately, in Africa, you have to have something has to be politically popular for you to actually take off with it. Absolutely. So lacking any of that, and if I do not support the current government, it means that whatever idea, however good it is not going to actually be received by government, and it's not going to be backed by it, just because they know me to be maybe part of an opposition. So a lot of our ideas are also dying through that. But that is also one thing that we worked with the AUDA, the idea of a synthesized data. So this is data that we're going to put together in an African context. And this is the data we're going to say, this is data that has been synthesized. This is data that all these AI models can be trained on. So if you bring your AI, you cannot get data outside of this data. So we give them the exact kind of data that we want as Africans, that these AI tools should be trained on, and and that should also be a good reflection on us as a continent, and it should also take into consideration our contextual aspects, our cultural aspects, as well as all the uniqueness and the differentiation factors that are within the African continent as well.
And as you were talking, I was just trying to clarify in my head the differences between the data protection in the context of things that are used to train AI models, right? Yeah. And data protection in terms of everyday use. You get my point? So when I
Yes.
am using, let's say, ChatGPT, and I upload a report on that and ask it to summarize it, something like that. Like, can you just clarify that in terms of data protection, the differences? And actually, are there, in these kind of day-to-day uses, are there breaches of law that is potentially happening? And how, like, I'm just figuring out how would you even litigate?
Yeah. So they are actually ways to actually breach by putting innocently, putting a report into your chat GPT to summarize, for example. That is actually usually the use case that I have actually seen being litigated. However, it also depends on the context itself. So most organizations, they have accessed or bought a certain portion of, say, OpenAI, so ChatGPT, which is specifically trained and protected within the organization. So the information does not actually go out into the wider multiverse, and it actually stays within the actual organization. So if you have, for example, signed an NDA, you have a non-confidentiality clause somewhere else, but whatever it is that you are writing, you forgot to actually add that aspect to that, and you did not retract any names, any personal information, it means that you have shared and exposed that data to the larger multiverse, which means that that data can be accessed by anyone. And, because AI has memory, and it is it learns. So somebody else asks a different question, but in the same context, it will record that data and it will give them, and then they will see that, oh, okay, so this actually happened like this. And now you, yeah, exactly. So these are the small dangers. So it's better to actually understand your own context under which you're using such information. AI can learn even if you redact questions, and if you needed to summarize and you still submit to it a redacted version, then you're safer. If there's over information that you think that the AI does not need to know all of this, you can always also copy paste the amounts of items that you do need to put into the AI and feed it, and have it summarize for you. You do not have to just copy the whole thing and just push it down AI. There has to definitely be a lot of responsibility. There's data minimization principles. Only feed AI what you absolutely need to feed it for the purposes you need it for. So giving it a 16-page where you only just need maybe a section of that 16-page to summarize would be over sharing with the AI. So just actually understanding, okay, I only just need this section. Let me give it this next section. So it means you're actually practicing data minimization in practice. So there's very little ways in which you can actually do that.
And I imagine it must be a minefield for organizations trying to navigate, and you got hundreds or even just 10 employees, and trying to kind of mitigate the extent to which they are violating various laws by those day-to-day uses, right? As well.
Yes. Yes. And I mean that this is when policy actually comes into play as well, Even in media, when you have that AI policy within your organization, it doesn't even have to be long. Just a good one pager where everyone reads and understand what it is that they're doing and how they can be a responsible AI user. When they sign that thing, they have signed to knowing that this is information that we're not going to abuse, and this is information that we're going to do on a specific in a specific way. So we're not going to um, take information that we do not need. We're not going to train AI on this particular information. We're also going to verify our sources. We're not going to rely on AI. We're going to double check. So you also maintain the integrity of your job, and to say, because people are worried AI is going to take their jobs. Why even go? Why listen
Go
to a
and start
journalist when I
telling
can
us
just
exactly how you do
can I
your
just
job.
we can just go? Yeah. But you see, that's the thing. Like AI can transcribe, it can translate, it can summarize, but it doesn't do the things that the actual heart of journalism is. It does not verify sources. It does not go out to actually get the story from the people, and it does not know the actual source of that information. So you are the ones that are holding that aspect and making sure you're using that data that you do have responsibly, especially in media, is such an important thing. So responsible AI is the goal, not killing AI. Yeah.
Yeah. And the risk of AI is not quite equally distributed, right? There's a lot of evidence, some of which we've produced ourselves, around how it's disproportionately is impacting women, right? Women journalists and women in the global
Oh yeah,
south more broadly as well, right? So issues around
absolutely.
surveillance, intimate image abuse, biased content, moderation that suppresses
Mm-hmm.
voices, facial recognition, all of those things, the kind of differences in how it treats lighter skin to darker skin, with like a
Oh
barrage
yeah.
of issues. So when you think about those risks in the African context specifically, what needs to happen, right? And I appreciate that's a very broad stroke question, but what is the
Yeah.
legal, what is the policy response, or what should it be?
Yes, image protection. I've actually co-authored a book on image rights with Nomalanga Mashinini. She's a doctor at University of Wits here in South Africa. And that book is actually so perfect because it touches on to issues that are specifically affecting image distribution and also handling of image. So it touches on data protection, image rights, as well as intellectual property, because someone will take a picture with their phone and that picture technically belongs to the person who has it in their phone. However, the subject within that picture also needs to consent to having that picture published in any other way. So the circumstances under which you are going to publish that picture are as important as you owning that picture intellectually, right? So we have been trying in this way in terms of the policy and also just developing image rights to stand as their own, to say how we actually protecting the vulnerable groups, because we have seen this. You see on Twitter, in fact, I was very mortified. I could see on Twitter where men would ask Grok, which is the Twitter AI. A woman I would post a picture of myself dressed like this, and then they would say, remove the clothes from the woman. And Grok actually did, you know, things like that. And this was actually happening. And I was completely mortified because children's pictures were ending up naked under Grok, and women's pictures like, oh, remove her bra. And I mean, the fact that Grok is able to listen to such a prompt in the first place, that it was not something that they imagined that anyone would actually ask an AI tool to do, and have that published on Twitter without the consent of the actual person within that photo. So whether it is AI generated, at the end of it, the violation is the same. You have violated my content where I was fully dressed. Now I am naked on the internet. So the policy response that Grok did take, because a lot of women they definitely brought it to their attention and said, this is absolutely unacceptable. We cannot live in a world where this is actually even a thing. It should not exist at the moment. And it was a very quick response on their part, where any such prompt, that talks about removing any kind of prompt that insinuated or implied that it would end up degrading someone or violating them in some way whatsoever in terms of their privacy, was going to not be accepted by Grok. But I mean, the fact that we even had to get there. So the protection has to really start at policy level. We have to know that when we're building any kind of systems, any kind of tools that are prone to being manipulated, we have to design with the privacy in mind. We have to design it with the protection of vulnerable people in mind. We can't just put something out there and then not see or imagine what the risk it presents are. We have to make sure that this is something that, even with the worst of the worst, because people are terrible out there, the most vulnerable groups of people are going to be respected, and their dignity is going to be maintained, and they're not going to be violated.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I picked up my phone because as you were speaking, I remembered I saw a BBC News this morning saying that ChatGPT, that researchers that found that ChatGPT can be made to make sexualized images as well, right? So, and I couldn't find it on my phone, so I've Googled it, and it's on BBC News today, and it says ChatGPT can be made to generate sexualized and violent images, researchers have found, right? You know, and it speaks to what you were saying about actually.
Yeah,
I mean, with Grok, it was so simple, but I think with ChatGPT, being able to put in the
it's
right prompt was able to then for create those sexualized images.
can you imagine that? And that's the thing, like, how are we building tools? And even as we develop and update these tools, we're still not considering and even embedding in them these privacy aspects of it, and also just making sure that there are some kinds of materials that cannot be produced, because ChatGPT can be used by kids. And now
Yes.
kids can develop these things, and those are
Yeah.
curious creatures, and no parent is going to think, oh, ChatGPT, I need parental guidance for ChatGPT. My child is just no. But these things, if they're already embedded in there, then parents also do not have to have that extra layer of protecting their children from yet another thing.
And I think this dimension of, kind of like you said, parents not having to protect their children from yet another thing is one of the critical things we must consider in this debate about social media bans for children under 16, right? Because I think
Exactly.
it's easy for people to think about it simply as a regulatory issue, but it's a lot more than that.
It's
It
a
is that extra
lot.
layer, like you said. I've got three kids, and we live in the
Yes.
UK, and just earlier this week, the UK just announced it will be banning social media. And as a parent, I was dancing. I was so happy, and my kids were so upset.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is why, this is what, these are the reasons why, So it's I think there's a different dimension beyond that goes beyond regulation sometimes. And this
Yes,
example,
absolutely.
families and parents and all of that is a good example of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. The impact is literally in real life, and dealing with parents that are busy, but that also still have to be a parent and monitor Grok, monitor ChatGPT, monitor YouTube. There's only so much, and at the end of it all, they still go to their friends' houses, and guess what? Those friends aren't even being monitored. So,
Exactly.
so
Exactly,
it's just
exactly. So it's
too
not just in
much.
your house, it's in every single
It's not.
household.
It's
Your
in every
kids have
single
to interact
household.
with. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So as a parent, I was definitely very happy because I mean, my eldest is 14
Oh,
and my middle child is 10. She's going to be 11, and she's about to start the journey of secondary
of
school. And I'm
course.
and I'm reflecting on kind of the because we gave our eldest a mobile phone very early because we felt okay, let's get the experience of using it. And obviously, all of that comes with consequences, in terms of what other kids are doing on Snapchat and those kind of stuff. And then having to like prospectively kind of say, okay, no, 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 we can't let you do this. But actually, with that experience now, we start our 11-year-old in a different pathway. And this social media can, as a parent, and I'm emphasizing the as a parent bit because as an intellectual, you probably have a multidimensional perspective on it. But as a parent thinking solely, that social media ban is actually going to help me better with my second child into that journey.
Exactly, exactly. You're thinking, oh, okay, this is so great. This is one less thing I have to worry about. And you focus on something else. And I mean, we want kids to have like a full life, to develop into these well-rounded individuals. But also at the same time, we're in a world where it's difficult to actually protect your children and actually ensure that they grow up to be very well rounded individuals, because there's just too much consumption of information at their little ages. They shouldn't have that much. They shouldn't know
But
that much
then also it's the lack of the platforms to take the necessary action they had all of these decades to take that they've not
to
taken
take.
has led
Exactly.
us down this route of bans. Because actually,
Yeah,
if platforms were taking things down very quickly, were very deliberate about children's protection. And I know some are better than others,
absolutely.
but I think there is a world in which if that had happened in the first instance, we wouldn't be here talking about bans. I think it's been a last resort.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's a last resort. It's a last resort. And I mean, for a government to think and get, okay, this is really what we have to do, it's because the response from these big social media groups is actually very slow. And we have to we have to still protect the children. We still have to protect the amount of access to information that they actually have, or the kind of information that they are feeding for their particular ages.
But it all still boils down to what we said earlier on about implementation, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's one thing to have the policies and the bans or the legislation. Enforcement is quite another. And
Of
that is, like
course.
you said, is the situation also with the Data Protection Act in Malawi. And also you have the AU now has a continental AI strategy. The AU has a roadmap. But the gap between policy on paper and practice on ground, whether in Africa and the world, is very broad. So I don't know. In your expert opinion, what is going to close that gap? What does meaningful enforcement look like in this context?
I feel like, firstly, we have to unify these legislations. I do believe, like I said, that a lot of statutes can really be on a continental basis. We can have a good regulatory umbrella. The um, the AU's AI, the continental strategy, is also a very good way, because now a lot of national policies on AI are drawing from that strategy, you see. So, and it makes the work actually so much easier, which means that even implementation becomes just that much more easier, because you're not trying to think for to start from scratch, but you're actually building it, taking what you can take in the context of your actual country and say, okay, this is what Malawi needs. This is what South Africa needs, because I'm not going to adopt an AI policy in South Africa with its great economic aspect and then take the same AI strategy in Malawi, where the infrastructure itself has not even developed. We have to make sure that even these AI strategies and everything can be unified. I do really believe in that consolidated legislation. There's definitely legislation that can be at a continental level. And if the AU can drive that, I think that it would be really great, because there's definitely legislation that we can all have and we would be able to deal with and tackle with a lot of enforcement if there's just one where we're dealing with something at a national level. Social media ban, where we get to a point where we're holding these companies accountable, it should not have to be per country. It can be on a continental basis, because we still have children in Algeria, we have children in Malawi, we have children in Zimbabwe. They'll all go through the exact same things. They're having access to the exact same things on the continent. So if we can deal with them naturally at a continental level, it means that we are actually going to regulate these things on a continental level rather than per country, because it means that the threat would still be there in another country. So that gap can really be closed by a more unified Africa, where our laws and regulations have come from a unified continental perspective, and we can actually just contextualize them within our national context.
Mbanangwa, I got it right?
Yes,
Yes?
so perfect. You're getting
Mbanangwa.
better.
I know, right? So we are at the end of our time together today. I've really enjoyed
Oh,
our conversation. It's been such an interesting kind of path journey to walk with you, and I imagine you got so much more to do in this space. But I want to give the
absolutely.
last word. Her Media Diary podcast reaches journalists, media professional leaders, policymakers all over the continent and beyond. So what do you want them to take away from this conversation? What is the one thing that you need them to know?
Okay. So the one thing I need everyone to know is that protecting data is actually protecting people. So when you protect information, you're not just protecting that data that is specifically ours, but you're also protecting our jobs. We're protecting our own integrity, our dignity, our credibility to be able to tell our jobs, to be able to tell our stories. Rather, we don't want to be in a situation where we are misinforming the public. So protecting data is actually protecting the individual that is behind that data. So our sources. anybody that is helping us tell our stories, do our jobs correctly, they deserve that protection. And if we abuse it, it means we have no stories to tell. So we want to make sure that we continue to tell stories on the African continent with the context that we do have. We want these stories to go on throughout, beyond what we have, what we can do at the moment. We want these stories to live on forever. Thank you so much, MEC. I was so happy to be part of this podcast. I enjoyed myself so much.
Thank you so much. You're amazing, and I look forward to collaborations and seeing where things go with you. Mbanangwa Kwilasya is someone who is doing the quiet work of making sure that when AI lands in African institutions, there is a legal framework waiting for it. It's not the kind of work that gets the headlines, but it is maybe the work that determines the kind of media landscapes that journalists, African women journalists, will be reporting in the next 10 years from now. So thank you for the conversation. And to everybody listening, the policy conversation is not separate from the journalism conversation. It is the same conversation. And we all have to be a part of it and play our role in it. If you found today's conversation inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to join me on an episode of the podcast, send me an email at yemisi@africanwomenmedia.com or visit our website on hermediadiary.com. So subscribe, follow Her Media Diary on your favorite podcasting platforms. Also tune in to our partner radio stations from anywhere across Africa. And don't forget to join the conversation using the hashtag Her Media Diary. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep amplifying the stories that matter.